Okay. Hello Internet, this is Olin from What I'm Listening To. So as you probably saw, I took the week off in the previous vlog because I was going through a little bit of an illness. Finally, I am well enough, I have my voice back, and I'm sitting back down to do more videos. But before I get to the main thing, I want to talk a little bit about the formatting of my videos. Over the last week, I've been really thinking about how I want to do the format of these videos, and it seems like really what I've been doing is sitting down and just talking about stuff that I've picked up, some other things in my collection, and just whatever random thing that would fit in a theme. And while I do like that idea, I want to expand a little bit more. What I plan on doing more of are person-themed vlogs, genre-themed vlogs, list-based vlogs, and I think I want to turn the experimental vlogs into its own thing. You've heard it here, first time talking about this. But in any case, I have a lot of things in my collection that I don't really get to talk about, and I want to experiment with new shows, and with that you'll probably see some minor tweaks and changes to the videos here and there. Just know that I'm playing with things, and I really want to try to find a good, concrete format to present these videos. Which brings me to this video. Today will be the very first list-based vlog I will be doing, and on here I'm going to be talking about 5 of my favorite live albums in my collection. Now the reason why I'm talking about live albums is because I didn't used to like live albums at all. I was a firm believer of listening to the studio albums and always saying that the studio recordings are the superior versions. The live editions are not as great, and not to mention you will hear people cheering, maybe people singing along or screaming and just overall ruining the song. But these were before the days where I attended a lot of live shows, and it finally took a lot of concert going to realize, hey, live shows are pretty cool, and some of the songs they do live sound cool. And over time, I grew to like live albums and find that there are some live albums that actually sound far superior to their studio counterparts. So I went through my collection here and picked out 5 of what I consider my all-time favorite live albums, and in no particular order, let's get started. At number 5, the first album I have here is Frampton Comes Alive. This is most likely the very first live album I ever heard, and I have my mom to thank for showing me this album. I initially wanted to talk about this in my Mother's Day vlog, but I stupidly, completely forgot about it until I was editing it, which is why there's a little end screen nod to it. But I figured this is the time to do it right here on this video. For those of you who don't know Peter Frampton, this is the album to own. He's got a very long line of albums he's put out over the years, spanning from the 70s all the way to the modern day. But if you're gonna pick any album, this is the one to get. The energy that's captured on these recordings are just so far superior than the studio versions. They're just so much fun, and you can tell that both the band and the crowd are having the time of their lives. A couple highlights off this album include Show Me the Way, Something's Happening, Penny for Your Thoughts, and then of course, Do You Feel Like We Do? Do You Feel Like We Do is most likely my favorite live recording of all time. And it's a notorious track because people would always say that Frampton made his guitar talk. What he really was doing was not only showing how talented he was at the guitar, but also showing how talented he was with the talk box. Overall, again, it's just such a fun listen. My mom has always described this album as music to put on while you're going to the beach. And what's even cooler is I got to see Peter Frampton play in the modern day this album in its entirety with a couple of his other songs that he's done. While it may not have been the same experience as listening to these albums, it still was a really cool show, and it was really awesome to say that I've seen these songs perform live, and I screamed like a little girl when he did Do You Feel Like We Do. But yes, this is a completely classic album, 2 discs of great music, completely crucial live album to have in your collection.
Ooh, baby, I love your way every day. Wanna tell you I love your way
next album I have here, this is Built to Spill's live album, simply titled Live. Now, as I said, initially I didn't like live albums at all, and while I had listened to that Peter Frampton album, I made that the one exception, but for the most part I was not really for live albums. That was until a good friend of mine decided to try to prove me wrong, so she bought me this album saying that this was the album that turned her on to live albums. And needless to say, this album is probably the reason why I now like live albums. There's something about these recordings that are just captured so well and are so much better than the studio versions. It's like the tone and the echo of the guitar, bass, and drum is just perfect. And best of all, there is very little audience sound, which at the time, again, was one of the reasons why I hated live recordings. So to have a live album with very minimal audience noise was something that was really appealing to me. I remember getting in the car and putting this album on my stereo, and hearing that opening track, The Plan, blew me away.
The plan keeps coming up again. The plan means nothing,
And from there, I was sold. Their performance of Car is awesome. I love it way more than the studio version.
I wanna see it when you find out what comic stars and moons are all about. Wanna see their faces turn to backs and heads and slowly get smaller.
And they even do a cover of a Neil Young song called Cortez the Killer. That song by itself really shows how talented they are as musicians. I love the entire track from start to finish. It's something that is absolutely worth listening to. The way they're playing, you can tell they're playing with every single bit of emotion emanating out of them.
He came dancing across the water with his stallions and guns, looking for the new world in the palace in the sun.
So yes, this is the album that got me into live albums, and I have to thank my friend for getting this for me, because I probably wouldn't be sitting here making this video if she hadn't gotten it, so you know who you are. Thanks a lot, man. The next album I have here, this is Mayhem's Live in Leipzig.
Come on! Leipzig! Come on! Join us! Pure fucking Armageddon!
I have definitely talked about this album in the past, and because I've mentioned it various times, I'll try to keep it a little short. Not only is this a great live album, but this album is the reason why I can't listen to polished black metal. The whole black metal scene began in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of the recordings that came out during that time were really raw and lo-fi, and as though they were using the crappiest microphones they could in order to record their songs. And a lot of the black metal bands from that time are now a lot more famous and are using a lot of the new studio tricks and the polished sound that we have today. But there's something about the raw nature of those recordings that give black metal such a sinister quality, and this album is an absolute testament to that. This was recorded back when the band had their guitarist Euronymous and their vocalist dead. A lot of the fans call that lineup the legendary lineup for Mayhem, and for me, it's my favorite lineup. They have a handful of live albums that they've recorded with that lineup. A lot of them don't sound great at all, some of which are actually so bad that it's pretty much inaudible. But it was this album where they went out of the way to make sure that the recordings were audible and they sounded great. And while the recordings are still crappy, it's a lot better than some of the other albums that are out there. This to me is an artifact of a scene that nobody really paid much attention to during its time. The black metal scene has a really bloody history, and on this album you can hear that underlying sense of evil that is emanating in everybody here. It's a great album from start to finish. It's only 9 songs long. I wish it was longer because I just think it's so good. It's one of the albums I end up listening to several times through after listening to it once through. So if you are ever getting into black metal, I highly recommend checking out Mayhem, especially this record. It was actually reissued recently, so if you see it in your local record store, definitely pick it up. This is an incredible live record and an incredible black metal record. Alright, the next album I have here, this is Wilco's Kicking Television. As I've probably mentioned in several videos, Wilco is one of my all-time favorite bands, up there with Flying Saucer Attack. Back when I was in college, I didn't have all of Wilco's albums, and the albums I did have varied on the format. Some of them were on CD, and some of them were digital. And I remember one specific day I decided I want to buy every single Wilco album on CD just to have them. And this was back in the day before I lived in San Francisco. So I hopped in my car and drove all the way out here to San Francisco, went to Amoeba and just grabbed every single Wilco album I didn't have on CD, bought them right then and there. The nice thing too was a lot of those albums were super cheap, so I didn't end up spending a lot of money. Even though I had listened to that Built to Spill album and I was coming around to live albums, I was still a smidge skeptical about them. But because it's Wilco and I love everything Wilco does, I sucked it up and I picked this one up. And honestly, I am so glad I did, because this is a phenomenal album. Unlike the other albums I've talked about here, this album doesn't actually have superior live cuts. I like both the cuts on here and the studio cuts equally. What makes this album great is what they do to the songs. At the time this album came out, Nels Cline had just joined the band, and man, he is such a talented guitarist. He uses all kinds of great effects, he does these great solos that'll just tear your face off, and he just really shows that he works so well with the other band members. Everybody in this album has such great chemistry. One of the highlight tracks off this one for me is Handshake Drugs. Nels adds these layers of guitars that almost makes the song sound like a shoegaze track. And then my other favorite recording on here is the intro track, Misunderstood. Misunderstood is definitely one of my top 5 Wilco tracks, and I particularly love when they do it live. If you don't know the song, towards the very end, there's a bit where Jeff Tweedy will say, "I'd like to thank you all for nothing," and repeating the phrase, nothing, 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 nothing at all. And on some performances, like the one on here, he'll keep the nothing going. And something about that is just so angsty and so great, and I love it. So if you're a fan of Wilco and for some reason have not listened to this album, highly, highly recommend checking it out. It'll give you a whole new perspective of some of Wilco's classic tracks, and you can really see how Nels shines in the band with this one. The last album I have here is a fairly recent acquisition. This is Daft Punk's Alive 2007. I have had this album digitally for ages and ages now, and it was up until recently when I decided I want to get a proper physical copy of it. And lo and behold, Amoeba had a copy of it in pristine condition, as well as including a bonus disc with an extra song and some live footage too. And I also want to point out how beautifully packaged this is. You got both CDs, one here, and then you got this awesome book with information, pictures from the show. It's just so cool. What makes this album so great is not only just how the songs sound and how great the energy is, but it's how Daft Punk plays with the songs. Daft Punk is known for having so many great hits. Around the World, One More Time, Aerodynamic, that's just to name a few. But on this album, they take some of those amazing songs and mesh them together to make one song. So they have recordings where they take songs like Robot Rock, Oh Yeah, and Rock and Roll and make it one song. They do a remix with One More Night and Aerodynamic. They do a remix of Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger with Around the World. And then I think my personal favorite remix is Superheroes with Human After All. It's simultaneously an amazing song and an amazing way to close out the album. So I'm very excited to finally add a proper CD copy of this to my collection. It is so good, and I think you don't really even need to be a fan of Daft Punk to enjoy this. This album stands alone by itself. It is absolutely incredible. It's one of the few albums that makes me want to dance, which I can't dance. I can't. But yes, Alive 2007, so good. Love the fact that I own this now. Okay, Internet, that concludes this vlog. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching. If you have any albums you want me to check out, particularly any live albums, leave a comment down below, and if I like it, maybe I'll include it in a vlog. Also, be sure to follow my WILT Instagram. I post a new album on there every single day and talk a little bit about it. And if you like the stuff I'm making, be sure to give me a subscribe. It also shows the support, and I appreciate it greatly. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you on the next video. Goodbye.
Do you recall its name?